Before we dive into history, let's start with the national anthem. In 1917, a revolution, primarily led by the Bolshevik Party, took place in the Russian Empire. Russia had been a major participant in the First World War, which at this point in time had not ended yet, but the communist invasion and takeover forced the Russians out of the war. In 1922, the war had officially been won by the Bolsheviks, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union for short, was formally established. Unfortunately for the Soviets, only 2 years later, the Soviet president, Vladimir Lenin, passed away. After his death, a man by the name of Joseph Stalin became the Soviet Union's new leader, and he would rule until his death in 1953. In the late 1920s and 1930s, the Soviet Union experienced rapid industrialization and agricultural advancements. At the beginning of the Second World War in 1939, the Soviet Union, with the help of Nazi Germany, successfully invaded Poland. A non-aggression pact was signed between Germany and the Soviet Union, but Germany would end up violating this pact just a few years later. 2, to be exact. In 1941, Germany put something called Operation Barbarossa into effect, which was a fancy name for the invasion of the Soviet Union. This was ultimately a huge mistake for the Germans, because the Soviets, along with the American and British forces, firmly defeated Germany soon after and forced them to surrender. After Germany's defeat in 1945, the Soviet Union and the United States engaged in the Cold War, where essentially both countries created as many vassal states as they could and told their vassal states to fight the vassal states of the other country. In 1962, a major Cold War conflict known as the Cuban Missile Crisis took place, and things got so bad that the United States and the Soviet Union almost engaged in a direct war conflict. This obviously would have ended very badly, since both of these countries had highly advanced war weapons that were capable of destroying the entire planet with considerable ease. Also in the 1960s, the space race took place, which the Soviet Union won, since they beat the United States in being the first to send a rocket to space. Even though the United States lost, they won in the competition of being the first to send humans to the moon. This happened in 1969. Speaking of the United States losing, they also lost the Vietnam War, which was by far the longest of the Cold War conflicts. Finally, in 1989, the Soviet Union's vassal states in Eastern Europe began to break away, and soon after, on Christmas Day of 1991, the Soviet Union itself would do the same. Although the Soviet Union only existed for around 70 years, which is less than the average human's lifespan, it still had an extremely rich and eventful history, and became one of the most famous historical nations today. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please consider subscribing and sharing our videos with others who may enjoy them as well. I have recently started naming random cities, towns, or villages at the end of each video, so today's place is Tofino, British Columbia, Canada.